Hello and welcome to our first live stream for prospective students that are thinking about applying to ERG. So welcome everyone. I'm David Anthoff. I'm a professor here in the Energy and Resources group at ERG. And I am joined today by two fantastic people that work at ERG, Candace and Kay. They are both graduate student advisors. One is incoming, one is outgoing. We're in the middle of a transition, so Kay, I think, is officially retired, but we managed to pull her back in for a little bit. And Candace is our new hire for this position, and she started, I think it was last week. So they will help me today field your questions and answer all the questions that you might have about our program. So maybe we'll just say hi to both of them really quickly. Kay, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Kay. I'm the graduate student advisor. I've been here at ERG for about 10 years. Been on campus for 23, if you must know. And we're really glad that you've joined us today. And we hope that we will begin to answer some of the many questions everybody no doubt has. So great, glad to have you here today.
Fantastic, Kay. And Candace, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Candace. I will be, or I am, I guess, the new graduate advisor for ERG. I've also been on campus for many years at different graduate advisor positions. So I'm very excited to be starting with ERG. And I wanted to say to you that I will be working with Julian, who is our admissions assistant. So as you have questions, please do send them to our email address of erggrad@berkeley.edu. That's ERGGRAD@berkeley.edu. And Julian and I will answer your questions as soon as we can.
Okay, fantastic. Before we jump sort of into some of the topics that we wanted to cover, I just wanted to give you a few reminders. So the first one is we are recording this session. So if you have to run in the middle or missed it, then you'll be able to just re-watch this. If you find it so fascinating that you wanted to watch it again and again, you can also do that. That's the first thing. The second thing is there is a YouTube chat window where you can ask questions as we go along, and then we'll try to answer as many of those as we can. So please, let's try to make this a little bit interactive with your questions. Just ask them in the YouTube chat. And then I just want to remind everyone that we have currently 3 more of these live streams scheduled. The next 3 ones will be always with the ERG core faculty. So I will be joined by, I think we've scheduled everyone except one faculty. There was a timing conflict, and I'll still try to sort that out. But most of the ERG core faculty will join me here on this live stream. And then we will talk a lot more about research topics and what faculty work on. And they will give you advice on how to prepare a good application to ERG as well. The reason you might ask, okay, why is David on all of these live streams? I'm the chair of the admissions committee, so I'm in charge of running our admissions process. And so that's why I'm with you here all the time. All right, so that's sort of the preliminaries. The format that we're going to use for today is that we have a couple of topics or areas that where we will give you a little bit of an overview of how that works in ERG, of how you can apply here, and then we'll do a quick pause and we'll respond to a couple questions in that section, and then we'll move on. So that's sort of roughly the format. You know, a little bit of information, a couple of questions, and then a little bit of information down the road. And I thought I would start with talking a little bit about why you might want to come to ERG specifically, and why that is the program that maybe it is a match for you, or maybe it is not a match for you, but why that might be a worthwhile consideration. And I should say I will keep this very brief because the unique features of ERG, we will in particular talk about those when the faculty are on the stream in the next couple of live streams. So I'll keep this relatively short and encourage you to join us in a couple of weeks' time when we do these live streams with faculty. So in general, at ERG, we study energy, resource, environmental, and justice questions. I think that's sort of broadly what we work on. There's a lot of work on climate change. ERG is a pretty unique program because we're very small. So I think you might have looked at a lot of environmental programs for PhD and master programs. And one thing that is really special about ERG is how small we are. And what that implies is what a tight-knit community we are, that everyone knows everyone, and that makes the place really very special. Apart, of course, from the fact that, and this, I don't want to have this become bragging, but we are, I think all ERG faculty are at the forefront of research and important policy debates. And it's sort of an intellectually incredibly stimulating place to do your master or PhD here at ERG. Both because of the ERG faculty, but also because of the the UC Berkeley campus, which is just very, very rich in terms of environmental faculty that work on those kinds of topics. All right, so I think I'm actually not going to talk more about specific things that we work on here in ERG because I'll keep that for the next live streams. But I do want to check in with Kay and Candace whether they want to add something to that.
A couple things come to mind that I just wanted to jump on the bandwagon. In terms of the size of ERG, I think it's important to also know, because we're small, we can be flexible. And what this means is that we, as much as we can, put the student in the driver's seat and don't just ram you through a program that's already prescribed for you. We try to consider each individual student's research goals and life goals, and design a program and allow them to design a program that helps them reach their goals. So I think that's really another amazing feature about ERG, is how much the students are empowered.
Okay, great. So I am hearing a complaint that there's a bit of an echo for me. So let me try, I don't know whether we can fix this, but let me try one way that might improve this. I will, okay, so let's see whether this helps. Okay, so this is all I can do. Beyond that, this is out of my hands. I have one, so we will look at some questions now, and those of you who are looking at the chat also, you will see that some of the questions are asked by the Energy and Resources group, and you might wonder what's going on there. Don't be confused. This is not that we don't understand our own program. Those are the questions that we actually fielded beforehand through the Google link, Google form, but having them here allows me to show them on the screen. So don't worry about that. So I have one question that I think fits in nicely here, and that is, what upcoming opportunities are there for students interested in climate and energy justice? So that's sort of a topic of why ERG, right? Why might ERG be a specifically good place to work on that? So I think if you're interested in climate and justice in particular, I can almost not think of a better place than ERG to work on that. And one reason is that the faculty in ERG are very invested in this topic. So they're Dan Kamen, Isha Ray, myself, Eugene Chung, and I probably could almost mention everyone, Duncan Calloway. We all work on climate change topics or justice topics, and often we combine them in our research. So I think the core faculty in ERG itself are interested in these topics. What's another aspect that is really exciting here is that campus actually has identified this topic as a priority for the UC Berkeley campus, and had a cluster hire round in the last couple of years, where they said we are going to hire specifically in climate and justice a number of new faculty all at the same time, so that we sort of increase the intellectual capacity on that topic here on campus. And there are faculty that were hired as part of this cluster that work in ERG. So Meg is a new faculty that just started in September that came out of this cluster hire. And so I think I can actually not think of any other campus in the world where this joint topic of climate and justice is getting as much attention as it is getting here on campus right now. And I think that always implies that for students, there are an enormous amount of opportunities for you to hook into the research of the faculty that is happening here on campus out of these clusters and so on. So I think that is sort of, if that's your topic that you're interested in, then ERG and the Berkeley campus is really a fantastic place to do that. Does anyone want to add something to that, either Kay or Candace? Okay, let's see what other question we have here. So I will have to sort of, because I'm also managing the questions, so that you will have to bear with me a little bit while I read them. Okay, so we have, okay, I'm just going to show this one here. Someone commented, Kay Burns, nice to finally put a face to the name. That's true. I agree. I don't think we need to answer anything there. All right. We have one other question that might fit into this segment here. I'm just going to put it in here as well. It's sort of specifically about how ERG works. And the question is, what support is in place to help an ERG student who is struggling to select a research question or find an advisor that can support their needs? And that sort of goes a little bit into the advising structure that we have here in ERG. And I'll cover that relatively briefly. So in general, so there's a difference here in how how this works for PhD students and for master students. But in general, for master students, when you come in, you are assigned an academic advisor, and that academic advisor will steer your path during those 2 years here at ERG. And the academic advisors is one of the core faculty in ERG. Those might not always be the faculty that really work on the research interest topics that you have, but they are really just like a mentor on your overall path. And then there's a master project that you will do while you're at ERG. And for those master projects, we assign an additional advising team to you, or actually you find it yourself, and your academic advisor can help you find that team. And we call those master project readers. And those are typically faculty that are much closer to the topics that you're interested in. And then they help you find your topics and so on. So that's sort of one side on the individual advising side of things, where we have essentially at least 3 typically faculty that will work quite individually with you. And then we also have something called the Master Seminar, which runs for the full 2 years of the master program, that is also taught by one of the core faculty, where we have a lot of check-ins and exercises that help you identify research topics, narrow them down, make them concrete, and there are deliverables around that and exercises that really help you with that. So I think we actually have a pretty robust structure that hopefully guides you to specific topics that you find interesting and can work on. So anyone, Candace or Kay, do you want to add anything to that?
I just wanted to say a few words about the fact that at ERG, unlike a lot of doctoral and even master's programs around the world, at ERG you're admitted to the group as a whole. You're not tied inextricably to any single faculty member. And this is quite unusual, and it's done, again, by design to empower you as a student to find the people on the Berkeley campus who really are in a position to advise you best. So you will always have somebody in the ERG core, as David said, who will be an academic advisor for you, but very often that's just a starting place. And you then move on, and oftentimes people have multiple advisors or change advisors as your research interests evolve. So yeah, it's a slightly different model than a lot of graduate programs, but again, and it puts you a little bit in the driver's seat, and also can be a little scary, but it is designed to give you as much latitude as possible in finding the advisors that really work for you.
Great. Okay. So I think what I want to do next is maybe briefly talk about the different degree options that we actually have in ERG. Because we don't only offer one degree, and all the applications are actually an integrated process. So let me sort of just give you a real short rundown over this. So we essentially have our PhD program, and so you can apply directly to the PhD program. If you are admitted to the PhD program, then in the vast majority of cases, you will actually go through essentially the identical coursework program as our master students go through. So the first 2 years of your PhD are very similar to what our master students do, and then you just stay on longer and work on your PhD. So that's sort of the PhD track. We sometimes waive this requirement that you go through the master sequence if you have already finished a master degree that we consider equivalent to our master degree. So if you've done a 2-year interdisciplinary environmental master degree and apply to our PhD program, then you will not have to go through another 2 years of coursework and so on here at ERG. But that's an individual decision that we make per case on the PhD side. The normal path for PhDs is that they come in and they have 2 years of coursework, and then they continue with their research. So that's the PhD side of things. And then we have our master programs. So we have a standalone master. It's a 2-year degree. It's an interdisciplinary master, and you can apply to that. I did actually get a question. Okay, so let me just pull that one up here. I did get one question, and I'll slip that in right now. What the difference between the MS and the MA degree is, because our masters, we have both. And so both Candace and Kay can now yell at me. I think I would not worry about that. People sometimes change that designation as they go through the program. I think a little bit to how they want to be viewed afterwards, whether they prefer an MS or MA. There might be some formal rules, but I would not wreck my brain about that question at all when you put your application together. Kay, you should chime in briefly here now.
I would say I agree with everything David just said. I think often people want to know if there's some strategic advantage to applying to one or the other, and there is not. When we look at masters in the application process, we just dump you all in one big pile.
Yeah.
So don't feel like you have to kind of psych out what we have a preference for. We really do want you to apply to the program that you think best fits your background and your future goals.
Yeah.
And as David said, you can switch it later. The determination about whether you should be an MA or MS to some degree is based on the coursework you select along the way. And because people do evolve, it can change. So, yeah.
So long story short, if you're unsure about it, just flip a coin. That's perfectly fine for the application. All right. So and then I just want to mention one other thing, and that's our concurrent degree programs. So some of you might have seen that as well. So you can also apply for a concurrent degree between the Energy and Resources Group, or ERG, and the Goldman Public Policy School. That's one of our concurrent degree programs. And then we also have a concurrent degree program with the law school. So those are additional options. I think I will actually defer to Kay very briefly again to describe the precise details of it. The short of it is that you then get a degree from Goldman and ERG, or from the law school and ERG. That's at least my understanding, but Kay can present that much clearer, I think.
Just a couple of headlines about this as it pertains to the application process. Because we did get one question about how do you apply for this, and what do we see when you apply? So this is a single degree. The concurrent degrees are a single degree that is offered jointly by the two departments. And yes, we can see everything that you submit for the public policy side, although we don't use it in the application process. It's not hidden from us. But we don't really read it. We don't use it. We look at what you are writing that's relevant for ERG. The decision-making process is completely separate. So they have their own committee. We have our own committee. And we make those decisions in secret and share the results with each other at the end. So you may be admitted to one side or the other, or both, or none. right? And then it's up to you to decide what you want to accept. And the only other thing to remember is if you get into one side and not the other side, you can always reapply in your second year to add the other side, which often it happens, frankly. So the concurrent degrees are 3 years instead of two. The advantage to the concurrent degree, as opposed to just getting 2 separate degrees, is that you can use the same course to satisfy requirements on both sides, on both programs. So it takes you 3 years instead of 4. So that's basically it. If my advice is, if you have questions about the concurrent degree with law, contact us individually and we'll talk you through that. It's a slightly different process.
Yeah, great. So I think, and just, in terms of advice for you, one key thing here is you are not lowering your chances to get admitted on either side if you apply for the concurrent degree, because it's not that you have to be admitted in both, right? So so you might think, oh, if I add the second degree, then my entire application sort of hinges on both committees saying yes. That's not the case. If one committee says yes, you can decide to just come to one of the programs. And so there's no downside risk of you adding an application for a concurrent degree. That does not lower your chances to get into ERG, for example.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I think that was the question about the joint degree program. Let me see whether we have more questions about that. Okay, so we have, all right, we have one fun question. I'm actually going to take this one here. And the question is, hello, I was wondering why most of the ERG Master graduates end up doing the PhD. All right, so that's an excellent question. Yeah, so this is actually a thing that goes in waves. So there were years in the past where that was not the case at all, where most ERG Master students did the master and then left ERG. In the last couple of years, the pendulum swung very heavily in the other direction. We had years where everyone except one master student actually continued into the PhD. We were quite unhappy with that extreme imbalance and tried very hard in the last couple of years to counter that. And I think my sense is that from the current master years and also the one that just graduated, we've managed to get that into a much better balance again. So it's definitely not our goal that the master is just a preparational step for people that want to do a PhD. We actually want our master degree to be a standalone, fantastic program for people that want to go out into the world and work and change the world. And I think so my sense right now is that what you've described certainly matches the question here matches what happened a couple of years ago, but I think we're in a much better place now, again, that this is more balanced. Kay might have a thought on this as well, or should we move on?
I think you've covered that.
Yeah. All right, then we have a question here. Are MPP ERG students able to become as well integrated into ERG as non-concurrent students? So my impression is very much. As far as I can tell, the ERG students, whether they are concurrent or not, hang out together all the time. I cannot see any difference there. I think Kay might have an even better insight into that than me, though.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to kind of know how it normally works. Because public policy has a much more highly structured program than we do, very often concurrent students will do their whole first year in public policy, doing all public policy classes and sort of immersing themselves in that community. And then in their second year, they sort of switch to sort of a mix of ERG and public policy. And then in their final year, they're pretty much all ERG. That's typically sort of the progression of how it works. So it is a little tricky to straddle these two communities, which have very different cultures, and also like different faculty and all that. But I think as people move through the program, they tend to be more and more integrated into ERG as they go along over the 3-year period.
Okay, great. All right, so I have a question here that I think we sort of briefly touched on, but I just want to reiterate that again. The question was, when you apply for the PhD program, will you still have to go through a master's program? So the answer to that is the normal default is that if you apply to our PhD program, that you will spend the first 2 years doing coursework, and that coursework is identical to what the coursework for our master's is. Now, having said that, there is an enormous amount of flexibility in what courses you take during those first 2 years. So PhD students often structure their first 2 years differently than master students because they have different goals, right? So while on paper the requirements are the same, the requirements are so flexible that they really allow you to compose a coursework program that helps you very much with the goals of your PhD. So that's, I think, all I want to say on that. Okay, if you want to chime in, do, but otherwise I think we should move on in terms of timing.
The only thing I'd like to add to that is that most PhDs do pick up a master's along the way, as they say. So you actually pick up a degree. You don't just do the coursework, but you will pick up a master's as well, unless you have a similar or equivalent 2-year master's program under your belt, in which case, yeah, as David said, there will be some flexibility there, and you may not pick up the degree. Berkeley doesn't allow you to do 2 masters that are too closely aligned with each other. So, yeah.
Yep. Okay, great. All right, so then I want to sort of move a little bit to another broad topic, and we have a couple of questions already about this as well, so I think that should work well, and that is sort of, we've got questions about preparing for ERG, right? Are there specific things that you can do to prepare for ERG? And so we talked about this actually before this stream, and we came up with some very broad things, but I do want to stress one thing. ERG, because we are so small, we are very flexible, and we don't have a schema or boxes that people fit into. So we are going to give you some very high-level, broad areas of advice, but know that we always have students that don't fit into that. Okay, so we are just not, we are so small, and we can so carefully craft our cohorts that we bring in that we that there is no real general advice. Okay, so everything I will say now, I could give you a counterexample to that. Not everything, but a lot of things. But one thing that I think a typical ERGie has when they come in is work experience. So that is one piece of advice I think that we typically give. If we sometimes accept people directly out of undergrad, but the vast majority of people that we accept into both the PhD and into our master degree program have worked for at least a couple of years. So the direct route out of undergraduate is not, it happens, but it is not the norm. So I think, and the reason for that is that we actually, one of the ideas of ERG is that we admit really fantastic and exceptional cohorts where the members of the cohort bring experience and insights to ERG, both to their own cohort, but also, quite frankly, to our faculty. And that works better if you've gone out and done some things in the world. So I think the typical ERGie has probably worked for a couple of years. We sometimes have people that come directly out of undergrad. We also regularly have people that have worked not for 3 years, but for 10 years or longer. So we most definitely, and we like to see these applications, we most definitely have people that have had quite distinguished and long careers and then want to pivot to something else. So that's definitely also welcome. So that is sort of one thing, sort of very broadly. If you can show us work experience, that is definitely good preparation. I think another thing is that if you have evidence of self-direction and show that you're motivated, that is really helpful. The ERG degrees, all of them have a lot of flexibility built in, and you need to be the kind of person that can deal with that. So it is not a degree program where we give you a list of courses that you have to take, and you just take them, and you don't have to think about the path that you're taking here. That if that's what you're looking for, then ERG is not for you, quite frankly. We need to, the students that we get in ERG and that we're looking for have shown at some level evidence that they can come up with their own path, are able to sort of navigate a menu of options, pick the one that is for them. So you need to have sort of a certain level of self-direction. I think that is sort of another important thing. There is not really, we've got a couple of questions. Are there specific classes that you should take around that thing? No. I think, yes, you need to have a certain minimal level of proficiency both in math and in your ability to write and logical reasoning and things like that. So if you don't have that, you're probably not a competitive candidate for the program. But if you have, but there is not a specific class that we think everyone should have taken before they come in here. The cohorts that we admit are too diverse in terms of interests and topics actually to give any sort of generic advice there. I think I'll stop there. Kay and Candace, do you have thoughts that you want to add there about preparation for?
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, I think all the things you're saying are really helpful, and the positive things about the ERG and all the flexibility and all the possibilities to be creative are wonderful. And it's just the figuring out, is that a good match for you? Is that something you want to be involved in and be creative around? And then you'll know it's really going to work for you. So that's the whole self-directed part of it, I think, is finding your path. We'll be here to help you, but you need to be motivated in that way. And then I think it's fabulous.
Great. All right, so let me just take a look what questions we are getting. So we're getting a couple of questions that I'm going to hold for now because we actually have sections later on where we specifically want to talk about these. And how are we doing on time? I think I'm actually going to just move on to the next broad topic. We might at the end do a grab bag of questions that are still left over that don't fit into any of the categories as well. But I do want to make sure we get to the main topics we wanted to talk about. So the next broad topic is that we wanted to talk about the different parts of your application that you need to put together, and what's important and what's less important, and what you should stress about or not stress about. Actually, don't stress about anything, and give you a little bit advice about those kinds of things. So one thing that I want to start with for an application is, and something that Kay already mentioned, but I just want to stress that again. Both for the PhD program and for the master program, you are not admitted by individual faculty. You are admitted into the ERG program as a program, okay? And so we'll talk a little later about the admissions process, how we actually make selections. But I can give you one preview about that, and that is that at no point will one individual faculty make a decision whether you are admitted or not. So our process is structured in such a way that the final decision is made jointly by faculty, but it's never one individual faculty. So I think a lot of people get advice from, reach out to individual faculty and then hope that when you want to apply to a program, and then hope that individual faculty will get you into the program. That is actually that doesn't work in ERG because we actually admit people into the program, and we have a process that is structured in such a way that individual faculty cannot short circuit this process. So that's number one. There's no need for you, the short message there is there's no need for you to reach out to individual faculty as part of your application and get an endorsement from them or anything like that. We actually almost discourage people, I think, to reach out to individual faculty because the reality of it is that ERG gets so many applications. It's literally hundreds and hundreds of applications. If everyone reaches out to faculty, we just cannot respond individually. It's just not feasible, and it's not required, right? So I think most people that get admitted actually have not individually reached out to faculty beforehand. So what is important in your application? We made one important change. We're no longer asking for the GRE in our admissions process. We made that change last year for the first time as part of the pandemic. And it actually worked really well that we did not have access to the GRE. And there's a lot of work that shows that a GRE is actually a really bad indicator of success in graduate school. And it has horrible equity implications, and so we made a decision last year to permanently do away with the requirement or even the possibility to submit a GRE as part of your application. So that is something you don't need to stress about. We ask you to submit your grades, but I do want to stress one thing. While we do look at your grades, we at no point have either a cutoff or do a ranking by grades. I would actually say that your grades play a pretty minor role in our admissions process. And I think that is something that maybe not everyone sort of You might think that if a degree program gets hundreds and hundreds of applications and then only picks 15 or something like that, that we just rank everyone by GPA and then pick the top 15. That's really not at all what we're doing. If your GPA is underwater, if your GPA is a 2.0, that's not going to help your application. But if your GPA is not a 3.9, that is really not something that will matter one bit in our application process. So don't stress about the GPA. I think if you, I think much more important is actually the essays that you submit. And we have 2 of those, and I'll say something about those in a second. And then letters of recommendation are important, but I think actually the most important thing is probably the 2 essays that you're going to submit. All right, so in these essays, let me just give you a very brief overview how they're distinguished. We ask for a personal history statement, and we ask for a research statement. And we got a lot of questions of what should I put into which one, what should I write? The essays we get are very individual and very different, so I'm not going to give you a template because we're a bit worried that if one of us now says, this is what you should put into your essay, then all of the essays this year will have that in, and we will lose the variety that we get typically. But here's sort of some very high-level advice. The personal history statement, at some level, the topic of that statement is you, okay? So so in your personal history statement, you should not just talk about the grid or the environment. We actually want to see a link to your personal history. How does that relate to your biography, what you've done, what you've worked on, and so on. So make sure that in the personal history statement, you as a person appear. And the personal history statement, in a way, is backwards looking. Okay, so we want to understand, why do you want to apply to ERG? What brought you to this place in your life that you decided that is what you want, what you want to do next? So that's my very broad thing about personal history statement. The research statement is really forward-looking. That's where you want to tell us what you hope to do here at ERG. And that's where you might talk about the specific research questions and topics that you are interested in pursuing here in ERG. That's very high level, but I'm going to give it, Kay or Candace, do you want to say a little bit more about either of these 2 essays, or should I say something about letters?
If I may, I would just add two things that these essays are not. And one is, in terms of your personal history statement, it is not a restatement of your CV in narrative form. Okay, we don't want you to go over every job you've had and every volunteer experience you've had as a list. We want you to be able to connect the dots between experiences and talk about, as David said, how your life so far brought you to this point of wanting to go to graduate school and apply to ERG. So that's the first thing. And for the PhDs among you, the PhD statement of purpose is not your proposed research question, full stop. We would really want you to stay more broad than that and talk about your research interests and the kinds of questions you'd like to pursue, but you're not writing a proposal for your dissertation here. So don't get too wadded up in a knot about this. We really want you to keep it on a much sort of broader, more aspirational level.
Great. Let me say something about letters of recommendations. They are important, and the most important thing is that they are specific about you, written from someone who knows you well. So if you are in a situation where you could either ask a famous professor whom you talk to a little bit but who doesn't really know you, Or you could ask for a letter of recommendation from someone who might be a little less famous, but you have worked with that person in depth and they know you well. Go with the second one. That is a much better story for you than someone who might have a big name but will write a generic letter just because that's the best. You know, they might have the best intentions in mind for you, but they just might not know you very well. So in general, the most important thing is that when we read a letter is that we get the impression this person actually knows you well and can speak to you and is not someone who, you know, has a superficial relationship with you. So I think that's just one thing that I see quite often, that people think they need to get the letter from the famous person. You don't. Get a letter that is really speaking about you, that is much more effective. I don't know whether Candace or Kay want to chime in on that aspect.
I have two pieces of advice on that. One is it's not cheating to give your letter writers talking points. You really want to encourage them to understand what ERG is as an interdisciplinary program and encourage them to speak to that, your ability to work in that kind of environment, to your leadership skills, to whatever you want to highlight. So work with your letter writers to let them know exactly, you know, what you'd like to have reflected in your letters. That's not out of bounds. The other thing to keep in mind is, for those of you who've been out in the work world for a number of years, we often get a lot of questions about, you know, when I was an undergrad 12 years ago, my professors won't remember me. One of your letters does need to be from an academic with a PhD. So if you have to go back to one of those people from your long distant past, remind them who you are, write them, you know, send them current CV and talk with them a little bit. They're usually willing to, you know, usually faculty are pretty understanding about that. But you can also have someone else, like if you're in a research firm or a think tank or something like that, and somebody that you work with is an academic and has a doctoral degree, they can write for you as well. But yeah, sometimes it's a little bit of a stretch if you've been out in the work world for a while, but at least one of your letters does have to be from an academic.
Okay, great. So I have a couple of questions in this segment that, so was there anything, Candace or Kay, that you wanted to say before we get to the question, or should we just go to the questions in this section?
Yeah, you can just go on.
Okay, so I have one question here. What makes a strong application essay? So I'm just we're not going to give you too detailed advice here, but I think one thing that I could think of, because this question came in early, is really be authentic. You know, and don't worry about sort of prestige type things, okay? So just as an example, I think sometimes people think, oh, if I didn't do an internship at the White House, then I don't stand a chance, or something like that. That couldn't be further from the truth, right? An effective essay can equally well be where you describe how you built, I don't know, a school program in your local community or something like that, right? So don't worry about sort of prestige things. Go with the things that you did and try to be authentic about those. That is much more effective than sort of trying to tick boxes that you think might look prestigious. That's not how ERG rolls. So I think that's sort of what I wanted to say there. Okay, so I have a question here. How many letters are read? We read all of them, so as many as you submit. And I think you need to submit 3 minimally. Yeah. Let's see whether we have more application. So there was one question. Yeah, can I complete my application for PhD without advisor? Yes. We admit into the program, not to advisors. So you can, most people that are admitted into our PhD program might indicate a preference for an advisor, but not even that is the case often, right? That is not a requirement that you have one of us lined up. Many PhD students here at ERG actually end up being primarily advised by faculty that are not actually in ERG core faculty, but are part of our affiliate program, which is, I think, almost 100 faculty here on campus. So that's actually maybe something to highlight here that distinguishes our PhD program from many other PhD programs. You don't need to pick and commit to a faculty when you apply. And I think that is a major, major luxury, because you don't know us. You don't know any of us, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you have to make a choice about a particular PhD advisor now, before you apply, you might be lucky and have applied and picked the person that you really enjoy working with for 5 years, or not, right? You might come here to campus, and after half a year, you might realize, oh my God, it's horrible to work with David, right? What have I gotten into here? And so in ERG, the model is very different. You come to campus, and during those first 2 years, you can essentially check us out, individual faculty, not just the ERG core faculty, but faculty in other departments as well, and then make your choice who will be your primary advisor. And that's quite a luxury, because it, I think, really allows you to make a much more informed decision about the person that you want to work with. So not a problem at all, actually the norm if you want to apply to ERG. There was a question, okay, let me just, there's a question here. If we're applying to a dual degree program, how could we tailor the personal history statement to acknowledge that? E.g., say, do we want to apply to the ERG MPP program? Yeah, I think it would make sense to highlight why you apply to both programs, right? We want to understand that. I think I'm not going to tell you more specifically how to do that. But yes, you know, it would be weird to receive a concurrent, so I have to be careful. It's a concurrent degree, not a dual degree. Kay corrected me before our session about that. But it would be weird if we receive a concurrent degree application and there was no mentioning or explanation why you are applying for the concurrent program, right? We want to understand that. Definitely make that clear. Kay, do you want to say something about that?
Just that we do sometimes, this is actually a good question, because we have seen applications where we've really puzzled over why ERG? Like, why don't they just get a public policy degree? Like, well, we don't get it. Like, why do you want us? Or conversely, what are they getting from public policy that they can't get from ERG? So yes, I think it is a good thing to address, and you know, that you're not just sort of degree collecting, right? But there's a real sort of a well thought out reason for why you would like to pursue this combined approach. So yeah.
Great. All right, then here I have a question. What if the academic who writes for me does not have a doctorate degree? So I think I'm going to defer this to Kay, because I think there are formal campus requirements that Kay and Candace are much more familiar with. I, as the admissions chair, would not care about that, but I think we should listen to what the formal rules are.
There is no formal rule on that, so we could waive that request. I would say if that's your situation, you should talk with us individually on the phone or by email, and we can explore that a little more.
Yeah, great. Okay. Do you expect, okay, so there's one question. Do you expect an incoming PhD student to have a fleshed out research question for their thesis? I think Kay answered this already, right? The short answer is no. You will use some of your time here to flesh out that. I think I should say one thing maybe to that. If you apply for the PhD and you have gone through a 2-year interdisciplinary equivalent master degree, then we would expect you to be more settled on those kinds of questions, because essentially we're going to waive the course requirements for you for the first 2 years, but in exchange we would expect that you have a clearer idea of what you actually want to do. So I think that if you have a 2-year environment, you know, in some broad sense environmental degree, then maybe you should have a bit more of a fleshed out idea. But if that's not the case, then what Kay said is spot on. Okay, I think let's move on to because we still have sort of a couple of broad topics we want to cover, and we also want to stop in about 10 minutes. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is the admissions process and how we do that. And we also have some questions about that. And that is actually quite unique, I think, how we run admissions here at ERG. The final decisions on admissions are made by ERG faculty. But the reality of it is that most of the admissions work and advice that faculty then mostly pick up, almost entirely, is actually done by current ERG students. So the way we run admissions is that we have a admissions committee, and that's the committee that I chair, and Kay in the past and Candace in the future helps run. And this committee is comprised of 12 current ERG students. It's secret who that is, so every year there's a little bit of mystery who got appointed to the admissions committee. And that committee is actually doing all the work of selecting the master students. For the PhD, I'll talk about the PhD process in a second, but for the master program. I'm not going to explain all the details of what this committee does. I'll just give you an overview because it's very complicated and very involved. But the short answer of this is that every file is read by multiple people. So I think there is, for example, the personal history statement of every application is read by at least 4 people on this committee. If we have certain rounds, right? So we sort of need to narrow it down, unfortunately. If you make it past one of the very early rounds, then every file starts to be read by everyone. So we spend an enormous amount of effort and time looking at each of these applications. And we look at these applications in a very holistic way. So at no stage do we do anything like say, oh, we just eliminate everyone who doesn't have a GPA of a certain kind, or anything like that. We never have like a hard cut criteria. We always look at the entire application and try to judge the application in a holistic way. So that's one thing that I want to highlight. Another thing, we spend a lot of time in the last couple of years introducing rubrics into our admissions process, so it's actually quite standardized. So when someone on the committee reads your application, they all use a standardized rubric, how they evaluate each application. So we make sure that every reader looks for similar things in your application, and that we don't sort of end up with, oh, reader A cares about X and reader B cares about Y, and then we get these weird sort of personal preferences come into play. So I think I just want to, you don't need to know all the details of how many rounds we have. It's many. It's a huge commitment for the people on this committee that they make. We spend so much time on this because we just really care about the cohorts that we put together. It's just it's a labor of love, I think, that we're doing there, because we feel that our students are one of the most valuable things in ERG, and so we just take it very seriously, the selection process. Typically, what happens is you will not notice any of that, right? So you submit your application, and then there's quiet for a time. And then at some point, for pretty much to the end of the process, for one of the final rounds is phone interviews with faculty. That happens typically sometime in January, although I won't commit to a precise timeline at this point. And then at the end, we make final selections. But I do want to stress that our admissions process is specifically designed to pick up excellence that might, at first glance, be a little bit hidden or not sort of conform to. So if your excellence does not manifest itself at having gone to an Ivy League, got a GPA of 4.0, and having done an internship in the White House, we would love to see your application in ERG, and we will go out of our way to read your application so careful that we will see all the other ways in which you might stand out and be a fantastic applicant for our program. So I don't know, let's see, Kay or Candace, do you want to chime in a little bit on this, on how we run admissions?
I think you did a great job of summarizing an incredibly complex process. I think the takeaway really is exactly what David said, that we are very, very careful at how we read these files, read these applications, and consider what people are bringing to the table. And I think, if there's sort of one distinguishing thing that we look for, it would be that we look for people who just don't fit neatly into everyone else's bucket, and who are a little more sort of broad-based, eclectic, interdisciplinary in their approach to life as well as research. So yeah, I think that it should be comforting to you that there are so many sets of eyes on each application, and that there's a real attempt to be as fair and even-handed about this process as we possibly can.
Yeah. All right. Let's see what questions we have about this. Okay, so we had one question here. Could you explain how the admissions process, how many steps we have between application submissions and acceptance? I think we have like 7 rounds or something like that. It's whenever we're in the middle of the process, I think everyone like curses ourselves and say like, how could we have gotten ourselves into this much work? And then every time the new cohort appears on campus, everyone is like, yes, we're doing exactly the right thing. But it's a very involved process. I have one question here. How can a non-US citizen get an application fee waiver? If you're in that bucket, I think you need to individually reach out to us about that situation. I don't think we can give a blanket response to that. Okay, is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, generally speaking, graduate division does not allow for fee waivers for international students. Departments can handle that on a departmental level in various ways, but generally speaking, doesn't look good, frankly. But yeah, if you have questions, and in general, I think international students have a lot more questions that we're not answering here today. And you should feel very welcome to email Candace and Julian, and they will be responding to your individual questions by email as we go through the fall.
Yeah, great. All right, so I have one question here that I definitely want to take. You said that bad grades do not hurt, but do strong grades help your application? So I wouldn't say that they don't hurt. It's definitely better if you, the 4.0 GPA looks great, right? But it's not our only application, okay? A criterion. I just want to, we are not having one metric like GPA or GRE or anything like that, and that's the decisive factor. That's not the case. If all of your grades are horrible, that will hurt your application. If all of your grades are fantastic, that will help your application. But that by itself will not decide whether you get admitted or not. And I think Kay has to say something there as well.
I just have to say this because it has come up year after year. We look very kindly on people. Like if you have a 4.0, but you took all very low risk classes in order to keep your GPA up, we're not interested in that, okay? So we look very much more kindly on someone who really pushed themselves into new territory and took risks on the kinds of classes and challenged themselves and got a B, as opposed to someone who stayed in their comfort zone and got straight A's. So yeah, we also look at transcripts to tell us, how much of a risk taker have you been? And how curious are you? And those kinds of things. So, we look at transcripts in a little bit different way.
Yeah. And we also look at every transcript in the context of your essays. Okay. And I think that is sort of really important. If there are, I can see someone with good but not fantastic grades, but a story that they worked 4 jobs parallel to their college degree. Well, that's very impressive, right? So I just want to say that there is not a single criterion that we use at any step. Anything that is good will help your application. Everything that is not good, we will try to see whether whether there's a reasonable explanation why that's the case, right? But I think I just want to stress that there's no single criterion. But at the same time, don't worry. If you have fantastic grade in difficult subjects, yes, that will impress us. That's certainly also the case. All right, then is the telephonic round focused on research, technical side, or just to know the applicant better? That's a very appropriate question, and I will not give you an answer to that right now, because the way we do this is that when we schedule these interviews, we are sending out an email with a little bit of a preview of what the interview will be about, and we want to make sure that everyone has exactly the same level of information about that, and so you'll have to go with the information that you get when we send out these interview emails, so that everyone has the same background. But I completely understand that you asked that. All right. So I think maybe that's enough on the admissions process. We're at time, actually. Let's go a little bit longer. I think if we add another 10 minutes or so, we can actually get through everything we had hoped to go through, and that would be great. So financial stuff is our next broad topic. What's our funding story? And let me give you a preview. Our funding story is interesting because we are a public university that does not have a gigantic endowment so that we can just throw money at everyone. At the same time, we work very, very hard to help people not leave our program with debt or things like that. The story is very actually distinct between PhD students and masters. I think we really need to sort of separate that out. For PhD students, if you are admitted, you will get a offer or a package offer that includes a funding component. The details of that are different every year and will be specific to your situation, but there will be some package that we try to put together for you. The funding often comes later than the admissions notice, so that's just a sort of heads up. The reality, though, is that I think, so I actually talked with Kay about this before this session. We cannot recall any case of a PhD student being unfunded ever in practice in the recent history. So PhD students, although we cannot promise at the point of admissions that you will be fully funded for 5 years, the reality is that our PhD students always find funding. Sometimes that's painful and stressful and requires a fair bit of work, but it normally works out. So that is the story on the PhD side. For master students, we typically are not able to make funding promises at the point of admissions. So I wish we could, but we don't have. We're not a rich department, so that's sort of the reality of that. But we also work very hard with you, with our master students, to try to find funding opportunities here on campus. And that can be either teaching or research for a faculty, or there are also various fellowship programs here on campus around. And that is sort of actually one of the major roles that both Kay did in the past and Candace will going forward play, is to actually help you navigate that and find funding opportunities. So our track record on that is very good. I think Kay has a statistic, but normally we find, for most master students, we also find funding. We really work hard on that. Even faculty, if we hear that someone is unfunded, we start to sort of think and try to find things. But we can typically not promise that at the beginning when you need to make a decision whether you want to come here or not, because those opportunities typically arise as you go through. And sometimes it's stressful for students, so I'm not going to kid you on that, right? So sometimes these funding opportunities come together later than everyone would hope. But I think the story is very two-sided. On one hand, the offers that we make often on paper look worse than those of our competing programs, because we cannot in the offer letter say, hey, you will be funded for 2 years. You will not have to pay a single dime. But the reality is that I think almost, or the vast majority of ERG students on the PhD side in any case, but even on the master side, comes out of this program without having taken on debt or having paid out of pocket in any significant way. So, Kay, now you can. I want you to chime in on this because you really are at the front line of this question.
Right. So I guess the first thing, like David mentioned, that we in the advising office consider this a primary activity, helping people find funding. Our goal is that nobody leaves ERG with debt. That's not always possible, of course, but just to give you a sense of where we are, a snapshot of this semester, this fall semester, including the incoming new student cohort, we have 72 students total, and we have 2 students who are paying out of pocket, which I think is a pretty impressive record. Of those 2, one of them has his own consulting business and really doesn't need our funding. So, I mean, I think there is pretty much a pretty overwhelming success rate. That's not uncommon at ERG, that we do have close to 100% funding or just under that. As David said, it is not without effort. But as soon as you are hitting the acceptance button for an admission offer, we fall immediately into gear and start working with you aggressively to nominate you for any fellowships that you are eligible for, identify with you and, sort of on an individual one-on-one basis, what's out there, what faculty might have research or teaching jobs that you should maybe get in touch with. That process is ongoing throughout the spring and summer before you get here. And as David said, it doesn't always come together as quickly as one might want, but it is something that we work doggedly at throughout the spring and summer and ongoing. And the other thing is, we've done some surveys of alumni at ERG about this, like, looking back at things, what is your take on the way we structure our funding? And everyone says, well, it was a crucible, but it is very much like the job market, right? You have to work at it. And you trade freedom for guarantees of funding. And, most alumni have said they feel like we did the right thing. So, that's it.
Okay. That's great. And I think, let's see what questions we have here, because we have a couple of questions on this topic in particular. So one question is, can you share information about funding opportunities at the ERG program? Maybe I'll say a few things about the different types of funding we have. So there are fellowship funding is sort of the funding where you don't have to do anything, right? So you apply, someone gives you money, and then there's no return from you other than saying thank you. That's sort of there are fellowship opportunities both in terms of campus fellowships and fellowships like the NSF fellowship outside of campus, and we help you find those. We help you apply to those. So there's a lot of support in trying to get those. So that's one opportunity. The next opportunity is what we call GSI, Graduate Student Instructors. So that is teaching. So you apply for a teaching job, and then you might teach a section for a class that a professor is teaching. So, just as an example, I teach a class in climate change economics. It's very large. I think we had over 300 students last year. So I typically employ something between 5, 6, 7 teaching assistants. And I always try to hire ERG students first, and then you teach sections in that. I think these teaching gigs, sometimes they're fantastic for a student because they're actually an opportunity to get to know a faculty well. So that can work out really well. And I've seen it many times that out of a teaching situation, a real advising relationship emerged. And so that is actually a pretty good opportunity sometimes. Sometimes it's not, right? Sometimes it's you teach for someone and the topic doesn't interest you and it pays your bills. That's also true, right? So that I think we have both of those situations. So that's sort of teaching gigs. And then the final thing is what we call GSR. That's a graduate student researcher. And that's where you help with research with faculty or someone at the Lawrence Berkeley Labs up the hill. Those are fantastic opportunities for students because they typically allow you to really engage with the faculty on research or as a research scientist at the labs. And they also pay for your tuition, and then they pay you a stipend. So I think that's the universe of how this works. I actually think sometimes the GSI and GSR thing is, at first you might think that the fellowship is always better because you don't have to work for that. But sometimes that's actually not true, because sometimes these GSIs and GSR positions actually allow you to work closely with someone that you would not have had that opportunity before. And you actually learn a lot also when you teach, for example, a class. So I think those are actually sometimes very rewarding opportunities. All right, so let me see. I think that also answered this question. Can you share information about funding opportunities? I think that's what we just talked about. Okay, do PhD students get priority for GSI positions? The decision to hire a GSI or not is made by the instructor, so the professor who teaches the class. And they can hire who they think will help best to teach the class. No, we have many master students that teach here. I think, but I do want to stress that I think PhD, we have not seen a PhD student go unfunded, right? So I think that's sort of the meta message here. And I should say another thing, ERG students have a reputation on campus, and it's a good one. So I think what we've seen over and over again is that when ERG students apply for teaching or GSR positions with faculty outside of ERG, they often have a very high success rate in getting these jobs because our program hires such fantastic students, and that is known on campus. And people are actually really keen to hire ERG students both for teaching and for research positions. So the history of ERG there definitely helps a lot. And the fact that your predecessors have been so fantastic. All right, so I think that's, Candace or Kay, do we have more things that we want to say about funding?
I was just going to sort of back up what Kay said, which is I do see this as a big part of my job, and that I'll be happy to help students as they come in to make sure that we're looking at all the possibilities for fellowships and help them match up with, as much as we can, with a good faculty member for teaching and for research.
Yeah, and okay, I have one final thing I want to say that. If you are admitted to ERG, and we make you an offer, then we actually invite everyone who is admitted here to campus, and fingers crossed, we will be able to do this in person this year and not remote on Zoom as we had to do it the last 2 years. And you will spend a whole day here on campus, and you will interact a lot with our current students. And my advice, if you are worried about funding right now, is I think I would put that worry aside for the moment. I would apply, and then I would really dive into that question when you have an offer and when you come and visit us here on campus, and actually talk to our current students about this, because their perspective is much more valuable than what the three of us here can tell you, right? You'll get the raw deal from them. So I think that is actually my advice of how I would think about this primarily. All right, so I think that was the final topic that we had prepared. Let me just take a real quick look at our chat for questions that are grab bag questions that didn't fit into any of the categories. Maybe we can answer a few more, and then we probably have to wrap this up also.
Well, while David's looking at the questions, I'm just going to jump on a little bit more on what he said right at the end there, which is I do encourage you all to reach out to current ERG students, not only after admission, but before, while you're writing your application, while you're thinking about ERG versus another program. Our students are our strongest selling point for sure. And if you write to Candace and Julian, and the best thing to do is to sort of look at the ERG website, look at the profiles of students you see there. If there is someone that you're like, oh, I would really like to talk to that person, and either because of their research topics or because they like rock climbing or whatever it is, we can hook you up. And the current students are really, really good about talking to prospective students. So be proactive about reaching out to students or asking for us to kind of introduce you to a student. The best way to understand the ERG community and the strength of the ERG community really is about the students. So yeah, do include that in your decision-making process, talking to some current students and even alum. If you see, we have little profiles of our alum on the website as well. If there's someone that you'd really like to talk to and get some feedback from, by all means, ask us for some contact information and we'll try to connect you.
Great. All right, so then I think I'll go through some of these rather quickly now because I do want to wrap this up, but I also don't want to let questions slip and not get answered. So here we have one question: where can students find the flexible list of courses, classes they can take over the course of the program? I think that comprehensive list does not exist, and the reason is that you can essentially take almost any class on campus and get credit for that as part of our degree. We have certain requirements that you need to take courses in certain areas, and that is sometimes a little bit more narrow. And we don't have the time now to go into that. That is just too much. I think that list of these areas is on our webpage. But there is a lot of flexibility in the ERG curriculum for you to take classes that do not fit into our requirements that interest you, right? So and this is sort of one of the reasons why we need people that are self-directed and can form their own path, because we are not filling your schedule with mandatory classes that you have to take and don't have to think about what you actually want to do. There's a lot of flexibility in your schedule, and I think there might be some small limitations, but I think pretty much any class on campus is probably fair game for you to take as part of your master's. And Candace or Kay can correct me if that's not correct.
Yeah, within. I mean, there are some rules, but it's too complicated to go into today. But no, you suffice it to say that we have these A through F breadth requirements in these broad areas, and what classes you take to satisfy those A through F breadth requirements is almost unlimited. And because the Berkeley catalog is constantly evolving, if you see a class that you're like, oh, I'd like to take that one for my econ requirement, and we've never done it before, you just present a syllabus to the faculty member, in this case David, who's in charge of that area, and you talk about it with your primary advisor and say, I'd like to take this class to meet this econ requirement. We'll take a look at the class and see if it's at a level that is acceptable for the degree. So yeah, ERG students take classes all over campus, and what classes you can use to satisfy these broad areas is very, very deep.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And one thing to highlight about ERG is because we're so small, we are very flexible, and I think almost all faculty know all students. So we are a very flat sort of organization. And because we know you and we trust you and we actually think that you're fabulous and know in some areas much more than we do, we are not sticklers for rules and so on. So that was very hard for me to adjust to. I come from Germany, but I think I've internalized this by now. But we are the mantra here is that we want you to succeed and get the best education for your path out of these 2 years. And if your path requires something that is unique to your case, then if that's a reasonable story, we almost always support those kinds of things. So that's one of the benefits of being in a small program. Because we're small, we don't have to sort of rely on rules that much. We can actually really try to cater to individual situations. All right, then I have a question here. What makes an application who is applying as an undergraduate senior to the PhD program a successful candidate at ERG? That's a great question. So I just want to, I cannot tell you sort of the specific properties of that, because there are no universal criteria that what makes a successful application. I just want to stress we do have people that apply directly from undergraduate successfully. So it's not the norm, but every year we have a couple of people that have not worked for 2 or 3 years, but come out of undergraduate directly. Tell us a convincing story, what you want to do here, how you got to the point where you are, but I cannot give you sort of specific things. This is what you need to add, or there's no checklist that makes that case convincing. All right, then I'm going to go a little bit quicker. Kay or Candace, if you want to chime in, then interrupt me, but otherwise I'm going to go through these questions relatively quickly now. Here a question. I have a master's degree in environmental engineering. Do you think it could be a problem? With a follow-up chat saying, I'm asking because on the website it says that programs may consider students for an additional academic master's degree. So this is this problem of conflicting masters. So the campus sometimes says, if you already have a master that is very similar to the master that we offer you here, they won't allow you to take our masters. I think if you're in that boat, reach out individually and we can give you a much better individual assessment whether that might be the case for you or not. If you apply to the PhD program, this is not a problem. That is only a problem if you apply. That can only become a problem if you apply to the master's program. All right, then I have here a question. Is there a list of courses that GSIs typically teach? A lot of GSIs. So we have sort of a regular roster of ERG of courses that are taught by ERG core faculty, and we typically try to hire ERG students first before we reach out to others. So I will probably blank on that, but a lot of people work for Dan Kammen's Energy and Society course every year. That's sort of a big course that hires a lot of GSIs. My climate economics course always hires a lot of GSIs out of the ERG core, ERG student body. Laura Kipper's environmental science course, I think, normally has ERG students GSI for it. And there are probably more. You know what I'll do? When we come to the ERG to the live streams with faculty, we'll ask that question with individual faculty, and they can actually also talk about that. So I'll just move on. Okay, if we have specific research interests and would like to chat with faculty that are working in those areas, is faculty available for those conversations? All right, so this is very tricky. The truth is we don't encourage applicants to reach out to individual faculty to discuss research questions beforehand, and the reason for that is that we just get too many of those requests to do a good job of answering them. What we are now, no one, if you try, that will not hurt your application. But I just want to set expectations. Some faculty sometimes respond, sometimes faculty don't. It's not uniform. If you don't get a response, it's probably because that faculty is getting dozens and dozens and dozens of requests like that, and it's just not practical to do that. But that is one of the things we are trying to sort of, we feel it's a very legitimate request that you have, right? So you of course want to reach out beforehand. And we hope that these live streams this year can help address that a little bit. And that's why we have these follow-up live streams with faculty where you will be able to ask questions in chat, and then hopefully the faculty will answer those. All right. I think, you know what, why don't we just because there are more questions keep coming in, which is fantastic, but we also will have to wrap this up. So I think what we'll do is we'll go until 5 Pacific time, so that's 6 more minutes, and then we'll just stop. And if there are questions left over after that, then that's just how it will have to be. Is there an outlet that you know of that students have to suggest courses to each other? So I assume that this question refers to students that are here and then sort of try to figure out which course they should take. Yes, there are lots of channels. So there are student mailing lists. We have an ERG Slack room where there's a lot of conversations about courses. There are individual faculty have lab groups where students from different cohorts interact with each other. There's a lot of conversations about courses in those lab groups. Students go on camping trips together. I don't know whether they talk about courses during those camping trips. But the ERG community is a very, very tight-knit community. It is not a big, 100, 150 students cohort program where a subset of students and not everyone else. Our incoming student cohort size is typically something like 15 to at most 20 students per year. You get to know everyone very quickly. And we have things like ERG Happy Hour, ERG Tea. So there's lots and lots of opportunity for people to exchange information about that.
David, you may not even know this, but the students also maintain a spreadsheet of courses they like and don't like, with commentary on there. So that is something that they will share with you. It's a student-maintained sheet.
So now I'm getting nervous. All right. Does the writing sample need to reflect the style we would anticipate our thesis would be? No. Not at all. Your essays do not have to be footnoted academic writing. In particular for the personal history statement. That's definitely not the format we are required to see. All right, how can we know the type of research that different professors are working on? Come and watch our next 3 streams. That's what I want to talk with all the faculty here. So I think for each one, I've invited 3 ERG faculty, so we'll be 4 on each stream. I'll moderate it, and then there will be one where I will also talk about my own research, but that's the plan for the next 3 streams, to have faculty talk about their research, what they're working on, how they integrate students into their work, and give you a chance to ask faculty about the topics they're working on. So I think this stream today was more about the logistic and mechanics of things, and I hope that the next 3 streams are really about the intellectual core and topics and research areas that are happening here at ERG. All right. I think, let me just scroll through this one more time. I think we've pretty much answered all the questions that I thought we would answer. Great. So let's do one more round. Candace or Kay, do you want to say one final thing, or should we wrap this up?
No, I think people are probably getting a little bit tired by now.
I don't even know whether anyone is still watching.
Right. All I can say is if you have more questions, do feel free to reach out to us, and we will try to walk you through as much as we can with the process. As you are learning very quickly, we are not going to give you any simple answers to complex questions, but if that's what you need, then you don't want to be here. But we do welcome your questions, and we are here to help you through this process.
Yep, I'm just looking forward to hearing from you.
Okay, fantastic. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kay and Candace in particular, and Julian in the background for running the show today. Thank you, everyone who tuned in. I hope to see many applications from you, and then I hope to see some of you here on campus next fall. Do tune in for the next sessions. I hope they will also be interesting. And with that, I wish you all a good weekend. Bye-bye.
Yeah.